Greetings, folks. Welcome to today's video. So today we're going to be talking about the topic of GMOs, or genetically modified organisms. Now, genetically modified organisms have been around for some time. Indeed, while imprecise and somewhat less direct, with a lack of knowledge of exactly what was going on, humans have basically been modifying organisms since before the days of civilization. We would breed dogs or cross-pollinate specific plants for particular outcomes that we wanted in order to ensure that we would get the most value from them. In this light, a species like corn is an excellent example. Maize, Zea mays, as we call it today, comes from a long line of genetically modified species, a very much smaller variety called Teosinte that came from parts of South America. And corn effectively cannot survive on its own without human intervention at this point. We've read it so far from what it originally was. On the other hand, it's been incredibly genetically successful. If we assume that the whole point of survival and reproduction is to produce multiple copies of oneself or of a particular species and get entirely new successful lines that will continue to go on, then the fields of corn that we see out there represent possibly the best mutualism that corn could possibly have desired in terms of genetic success. The value that it provides to humans means that it gets many, many replications. And so, in that perspective, GMO has been highly successful, at least for the species being bred. There's no question that the dogs exist in numbers and with consistency that otherwise would not be possible, although it is notable that specific individuals within those species, the dogs we choose not to breed, do end up at a disadvantage since they are outright denied the opportunity to reproduce frequently. But of course, the biggest things that we find about GMOs are the modern techniques and technologies that are involved in this approach to altering organisms, specifically using genetic modification techniques, most notably CRISPR, which has been by far the most successful in the modern era. Using existing machinery to target specific points on genetic code has proven far more effective than knockout systems or radiation modifications that have been tried in the past. Those would get results, but usually poor and unfocused, without really hitting on the particular goal most of the time. And therefore you'd waste a lot more money and effort on them, as well as a lot of generations that would otherwise not have had to go through in order to get the desired results. So using these ever more highly effective systems, we have gotten to the point where a lot of our food, at least in the United States, has some element of genetic modification. And that genetic modification has been a point of major controversy. Now, we know that the evidence for significant harms from consumption of GMO crops and other stuffs that we engage with regularly is not significant. You can look around and you'll see the literature strongly points to general safety from GMOs, and the outcomes from consuming them generally not much different from consuming that of normal, or I guess unmodified species, whatever that means, since of course no species in existence hasn't had its genome modified by some means over time. Indeed, that is kind of the underlying concept of evolution, and every species on the planet has evolved to one degree or another. Nothing is like it was a billion years ago, a million years ago even. Everything has continued to change, including human beings, which is a particularly interesting one to consider. What are the ethics of genetic modification in humans? And that's a good particular thing to look at. Humans, of course, would potentially see significant harms and or benefits from genetic modification. Of course, if you're playing with the genome, you could significantly affect a human in a negative way, and you may cause a lot of damage. So most of the current concepts revolving around this are based on the idea that you can and maybe should edit small elements of the human genome, usually to try and resolve disease, but you should not in any way edit the germline, which basically means it is inheritable changes, so that you can't affect future generations or have it get out into the larger human population over time through breeding or through other transport that would be undesirable. But we also, should be looking at what we're losing if we are too worried about this, if we basically forbid experimentation, especially self-experimentation. It's been very interesting to see the way that people and governments have reacted to people experimenting on themselves in an entire field or subfield in biology known as biohacking, or I guess in this case more of auto-hacking specifically. And people will alter themselves or experiment on themselves in various ways. It's been viewed extremely negatively in many cases, and a lot of the legal elements around this have made it very difficult to do a lot of biohacking in general, let alone biohacking on the self. And certainly there's some degree of question of safety and efficacy, as there always is. But just like the problems with some of the more extreme perspectives of the FDA, individual choice and bodily autonomy has to enter into this as an option. We have to be not only willing, but able to say, I wish to experiment on myself. I believe there is sufficient value in doing so, and that I am willing to accept the consequences, good or bad. And as long as we can make sure that that does not have any significant chance of causing massive harm or even minor harm to others, as long as it doesn't affect anyone but the self, then they should be basically free to try a very wide range of options. And this applies to the same thing as we would see with something like extreme sports. We let people consistently go and fly wingsuits around, and they are continually allowed to do so despite the significant risk to themselves from doing so. In fact, the whole range of extreme sports is permissible. You can go mountain biking without a helmet. It's not recommended. It's not a particularly good idea, but that is a choice you can make with yourself. And the potential consequences may have negative impacts on others, but it is primarily focused on yourself that this is going on, and that is what we need to look at. And so we need to be conscious of the fact that genetic modification is something that's going to get out there as well. We can put all these laws in place, have all these restrictions, worry about all these ethics, and that's very important. But like any other technology, especially one that's relatively cheap and accessible like this, it's going to become ever more available to different people in different places. And we need to consider the fact that people are going to be experimenting with it legally or not. So if we allow more of it to be experimented with by people who are publishing, who are knowledgeable, and are making all of this information widely available, then we will have a better understanding of how to deal with these various things that are going to be explored and discovered, and we're going to be able to move forward on them. And with that, we need to consider, finally, what is it that we miss or lose if we don't consider doing these? How many people may lose out on opportunities for healing or improvement? Previously, we've discussed human hacking to make significant improvements. But these technologies, while they have amazing potential, we don't get them. They don't exist unless we do the research, unless we move forward, unless we're willing to embrace possibility with a little bit of risk along the way. And so GMOs are definitely valuable things we want to look into. With that, I think we're at the end of today's thoughts. If you like this, go ahead and subscribe, like, comment, etc. You know the drill by now. And if you don't, you need to watch more YouTube. Have a great day.